As a developer, I lived in heaven. My code was a sprawling sandy beach, an exciting domain of my own creation, dedicated to the open source void. Then the shadow fell. This big guy came and commanded my music down and put my cocktail away. And the worst part of it, he didn't mention a word about leaving. Welcome to today's talk. That is how a lot of us now are feeling about the EU Cyber Resilience Act, which is scary regulation that is coming to all of the developers without any exceptions. Today, hopefully, we're going to debunk some of the myths, and we're going to talk about how to stay compliant with and take benefits of the EU Cyber Resilience Act. My name is Roman, and I do security for 17 plus years as a practitioner. Now I am responsible for security community engagement here in Red Hat. And just a little disclaimer, as we're talking about the intersection of regulation and whatnot, this is not a legal advice, and the EU Cyber Resilience Act is actually one of the biggest and most complicated regulations that affects the tech world in many years, so it's all evolving. Don't take it as a legal advice, but rather the kind of community opinion how to approach it. All right. Let's get started. This is the own warning of the European Commission. From baby monitors to smartwatches, products and software that contain a digital component are omnipresent in our daily lives. I don't want to tell you that, right? But it also imposes some of the security risks, which is not a big news for us security practitioners, but finally, it's not at a very high level. This new regulation, Cyber Resilience Act, or CRA, came into the picture. It's a EU regulation applicable to all member states here in Europe that aims to safeguard consumers and businesses using products with digital elements, or so-called PDEs or PWDE, different abbreviations. It introduces mandatory cybersecurity requirements for manufacturers and retailers throughout the entire life cycle of the products of digital elements. And most importantly, through its entire supply chain, like third parties and open source dependencies. That's quite a big deal, isn't it? Now imagine, in the age of AI, we are now doing some beautiful things, and this is just one example what we at Red Hat are doing with AI. We're helping with the exploration, prevention of veteran suicides, powered by OpenShift AI and other technologies. Quite exciting world that is powered by AI, right? And all of these innovations. On the other hand, keep in mind the date here in the little square. It's February 2025. A single default password exposes access to dozens of apartment buildings, right? So these two things are happening simultaneously. That's why CRA came to picture. Now, what it's all about. If you could imagine your smart home and even operating systems and web browsers and password managers, they're all in scope of these regulations and this regulation. And this is so-called important class 1 that comprises 19 types of the different important products. Now, if you could imagine even more like firewalls, tamper-resistant CPUs, hypervisors, they're all important class 2, and they're really important, right, for us. Imagine if something goes wrong with it. Now imagine even more critical hardware devices with security boxes, smart meter gateways. I have one, for example, in my own house. They're really critical if something goes wrong. But everything else, all the consumer devices and all the electronics and all the products, all the software and hardware, including actually free and open source software are also in scope as a default category, and that's going to be the rest, or the even more than 19% of all the products that are around us. They are also in scope of this regulation, so this is a big deal. What is out of scope of CRA, as this is the most common question, right? Products covered by other regulations or directives, like automotive, medical, aviation, and so on. Products designed for national security, which kind of makes sense. And pure websites, and also software as a service, if the products, if they're not essential for functioning of some of the kind of physical products that are produced and put on the market. So it's very important to understand that almost everything is in scope actually. So that's going to be a big deal. Now, the question would be about the CRA requirements. This is the most complicated part of the regulation actually, because a lot of questions that we have as practitioners and as a community. Okay, now we are in scope, so what? What am I going to do about that? What are requirements that I have? And this is the top 5 streams of the requirements or buckets of the requirements that CRA imposes. Essential cybersecurity requirements and risk management for those manufacturers of the products with digital elements. Keep in mind, software is also in scope. Due diligence for third parties, including free and open source components and producing SBOM, software bills of materials, inventory of the components that I consume. Vulnerability management and regular updates for introducing patches and fixes and timely updates. There is also requirements for no actively exploited vulnerabilities being identified in the products, and also reporting requirements if any of the exploited vulnerabilities are indicated to authorities, to EU authorities specifically. Isn't it something brand new in the security world or in the supply chain security or general in cybersecurity? I don't think so. What might be new really with the CRA here is the so-called conformity assessment. If you take out your device or have a look at your device at home, more likely it has this CE mark on it. And this conformity assessment kind of transformed to the product with digital elements, including software. We're going to be figuring out together how we all will be affixing these CE marks to software, right? That's all that is coming. Now the timeline. The next most popular question after the scope and the requirements is when, right? Okay, now I understand I am affected or not, and at least at a glance what I need to do when I need to implement all these requirements. This is kind of simplified entire timeline, and keep in mind that CRA is officially already in force, though some of the most important parts of the regulation will be applicable later in 2026 and 2027. I will put your attention at the 2 major milestones here. Reporting obligations of vulnerabilities will come into force in September 2026, and it will be full applicable with in all entirety in December 2027, followed by enforcements, right? Okay, now you could ask, okay, this is all like kind of makes sense for manufacturers of all of these devices that I showed you and all of these examples, right? Why free and open source software is here actually? Okay, I think because of the 2 main reasons. The first one is 100 million with M, right, dollars of market value belongs to 5% of active free and open source developers. So this is a huge market, and this is kind of statistics that concluded by the curl maintainer Daniel Sternberg early at Force there in Göteborg. On the other hand, this is our own modern digital infrastructure, right? That is dependent on the open source. Who's familiar with Log4j? All right, almost everybody, right? That was a big deal, a big supply chain concern. I think the biggest wake up after Heartbleed vulnerability in the OpenSSL that's actually affected a lot of companies, and a lot of ransomware gang actually gained money on it. Now, important open source software roles in CRA as follows. Manufacturer actually is in the center of the regulation. EU CRA defines the manufacturer as a natural legal person who actually develops products with digital elements, which again kind of makes sense to have this role. Importer or distributor ensures manufacturer has done conformity assessment, and you can think of the retailers, resellers, and other distributors. Now, open source contributor or developer. It's important to note that this role is actually entirely out of scope of the CRA, and I will show you the simplified diagram later on so that you're not scared about that part. Maintainer, also kind of out of scope if it doesn't monetize the projects that he's working on. And the brand new role that actually didn't exist before is open source software steward, who systematically supports open source projects. You can think about them as a foundations, for example, Linux Foundation or Eclipse Foundation or others, who actually try to support the number of open source projects and try to keep these communities going. Okay, and this is the new role under the CRA, which doesn't have a lot of obligations at the first glance, but would be very, very important as a critical bridge between the manufacturers and open source developers and consumers. There is no surprise that most of obligations under CRA actually goes to manufacturers. That is kind of expected. There are some obligations for importers or distributors, mainly to make sure that manufacturers do their job right. OpenSS stewards has so-called the light touch regulatory regime, and mainly responsible for notifying authorities about actively exploited vulnerabilities. But you know what? Most of the open source projects, they will not have stewards, right? I think most of us, or at least some of us, are working on a number of open source projects, and not all of them actually have the foundation umbrella, right? As individual projects and etc. Now, don't be scared. This is the one of the key message that we are trying to pursue as the experts that are heavily involved both in the standardization work that is happening as the part of implementation of the Cyber Resilience Act, and as a member of foundations and etc. This is a simple diagram. If you read it from left to right, if you're a contributor to the project that you are a maintainer for, and the answer is no, right? If you're kind of not maintain any projects, CRA is not applicable to you. Just live in peace. Now, if you're a maintainer and do not take money for anything, CRA is not applicable to you either. Now, if you're a maintainer and accept donations that cover the actual cost of the development of keeping the project alive, CRA is not applicable. Now, if you're a maintainer and charge for anything else, for example, you sell some additional services, support, or gain a profit of it, CRA may be applicable to you. As we are working on the implementation specifics, it's still not clear in which cases it's kind of maybe applicable. You still could be potentially out of scope either, right? But if you're just contributing or maintaining and not taking money for anything, just keep going, right? Important to know that CRA actually doesn't impose any obligations for OSS open source projects themselves. All is dependent on the course of monetization and your particular role in it, okay? Of course, we will have the indirect impact for the open source projects in order to make stewards or maintainers or others compliant, but I think you got the point. Now, if you feel you're alone on your journey and sounds like, okay, this is so scary, I have never heard about, and I don't want to deal with regulations like that or any other regulations, first, like, read the diagram at the previous slide and hopefully you're not in scope. But you are not alone on this journey because you're not alone asking questions like that. Can a project be without a steward? Is distributing binaries or container images of an open source project considered as making it available on the market itself, right? Those, am I in scope of CRA if I'm doing just this, okay? So I monetize an open source project. What does it mean for me in general? Good question. I'm worried about this CRA and I'm considering shattering my projects. What should I know? What should you do is not to shut down your project, right? So questions like that are very, very important, and we are working on the answers. I mentioned you are not alone who asked actually these questions. I also asked these questions, and a lot of others are asking these questions. You're not alone in this journey. Work is here to help you, and others besides the org. You're wondering why org? Because that's how we call ourselves Open Regulatory Compliance Working Group, or ORC working group, that is formed under Eclipse Foundation, and we are working on a bunch of the good things. First of all, on the awareness and guidance for the open source ecosystem, actually for everybody, for manufacturers, for potential stewards, and for the projects themselves, to produce the FAQs and white paper. We're working on inventory, like to name and publish all the resources and standards and frameworks that are available right now as a good security practices to follow. We are aiming to produce the specifications that are going to be free and concise guidance for open source ecosystem in order to help with the kind of CRA complexities. Because unfortunately, not all of the official standards that are now under the work of the CRA will be freely available, free of charge. So if you want to join, this is github.com/ORC working group. Please go ahead and join. Of course, we need more help to do things, but also learn more what we're doing. Hopefully, that's going to be helpful for all of us. What else? We are heavily engaged into the Global Cyber Policy Working Group, which is happening under the Linux Foundation and OpenSSF Foundation. What we do there? We do CRA clarifications, we do blog posts, workshops, checklist and guidance, awareness and education. That's also a very important piece to spread the word, to share, to educate everybody how to handle all of this stuff. There is intention to put more resources to work on tooling to help projects achieve CRA readiness and demonstrate compliance. Okay, if you want to join, click the link, follow the QR code. It's also freely available on the GitHub. All the meetings and all the collaborations, they are free to join for everybody because we do it in the open source way. What else we do that could help and that you can actually apply right now in order to be not only to be ready for the stuff like CRA, but in order to do the healthy, clean and secure projects, okay, in general. This is open source security baseline, or OSBS. This is initiative at project, again, under OpenSSF, comprising of 56 currently requirements across 3 levels of maturity, covering 8 areas of security practices. If you have a look at these areas, they kind of all make sense, right? To think about access controls to your repo, to think about the good documentation. Legal is always important, like licensing and etc. Governance, quality, so they all make sense, okay, for the healthy, normal projects. All right, they are not really tightened to any of the compliance specifically. One example, for example, this specific control or guideline tells you when a new collaborator is added to open source project, the version control system, okay, like those embedded in GitLab, GitHub, or etc., must require manual permission assignments or restrict the collaborator permissions to the lowest available privilege by default, so that we don't have some of the kind of malicious guys joining and committing their random code, arbitrary code, so that you have a tons of unverified stuff in your repo. Kind of makes sense, right? We should do it, regardless of anything else. If you want to check it out, of course it's free and it's open source also at the OpenSSF GitHub. Now, how it could help Cyber Resilience Act. I mentioned there are 56 best practices, right? And they're spanning over 3 levels. Level 1, level 2, and level 3, like the most mature. Level 1 is really basics for everyone. It doesn't take any additional extra resources to implement them, just to apply the general practices. The level 2 is suitable if you have more maintainers. Level 3 is really for mature projects or for graduated projects like those happening under the major foundations. If I can bring a few examples, right? For example, the control documentation must contain security context in your repo, okay? Release must be signed. Good stuff. Project must perform a security assessment. Documentation must include a policy for coordinated vulnerability reporting, which also kind of makes sense. If you were attentive enough to the start of the presentation, you can already feel some of the correlation with the requirements in the CRA, right? The security risk assessment, vulnerability stuff, and etc. So the expectation is that all would give so-called presumption of CRA conformity for open source projects, even though this is kind of more the terms of the legal and applicable for manufacturers, but that would help with the due diligence requirements for manufacturers as they exercise this against the open source project. Now, a quick mention of Security Insight specification, which is another brilliant project under OpenSSF. This is basically the specification and YAML file that you would put in your repo, declaring of the good practices, of the good security practices that you are implementing into your project. And I brought you example of KeyCloak, which is a great open source project under CNCF. And for example, they put their Security Insight YAML, you can check it out at the GitHub, and they would put things like, okay, I'm using some of the security tools as a part of my project development, right? And this is all declared in the YAML file so that it's machine readable and could be then verified for those who want to make sure that the project implements the good practices, the good security practices in this case. And that would give so-called declaration of CRA conformity for open source projects. This is still work in progress, but the expectation that it would help a lot. I would say other initiatives are also happening, like under OWASP Cyclone DX. They are working on open source software sustainability working group, which is somewhat of similar to this. They are thinking on the standards or in the way how to actually declare that open source project either needs help with something or declare that it's already implementing some of the good security practices. So that also would help. Now, this brilliant class was released also by Linux Foundation, and we contributed to it a lot. And the best part of it, this is free of charge, like $0. This is CRA, Understanding the EU Cyber Resilience Act, the really basics about the CRA. I would encourage everybody to take this class and to spread the word to everybody else to learn the basics, okay? It's quite helpful, it doesn't take a lot of time, and it's free. And also it gives you a nice page that you can attach to the social media. Now, key takeaways. That's a lot, right? And as I mentioned, the CRA is one of the most complex regulations that would affect the entire tech ecosystem and entire open source ecosystem. But on the other hand, this is a good additional, like, explicit call for implementing security practices and safeguarding supply chain that we are suffering attacks for, right? Don't stop contributing and support open source project because of CRA. So this is not an intention of CRA, and this is explicitly kind of, that explicitly was mentioned by EU commissions and other officials. Take benefits of CRA because, again, this is call for sustainable, healthy, and secure future for your open source project or for another project that you're contributing to or maintaining. Join community efforts. We need your help, right? Because what I just showed, it was not like a given fact. At the first iterations of the CRA, it was much worse for the open source ecosystem, imposing all of these requirements, and open source projects and contributors was not an exemption of the regulation. Now it's better because of community efforts, because all of you, all of us that came together and say, hey, now we actually do stuff differently, and this is the reasons why. Join our efforts to make it more sustainable, to make it reasonable for the ecosystem. And finally, to stay compliant, act now. Act now by following the best security practices that are actually already available there. And if you are doing so, most likely you would be okay pending like all the clarifications and specifics, but if you do the good and reasonable stuff right now, you are gonna be okay most likely later on. So start now, the time is now, 2026 and 2027 is not far away actually. All right, I hope that was helpful. Thank you for your attention. Questions?
Yes.
Allowed.
I have two questions, if I may.
Go for it.
The first one, what about the consumers? So I'm a manufacturer, I'm using open source that doesn't have any label being CR compliant whatsoever. Do I have to treat it as if I've written the software on my own? The second question is about the role of the stewards.
Okay, yeah, the first question, I'm going to repeat it. The first question was, as a personal company, I write my own software and then I have the consumers of this software, but I also consume software dependencies that are not labeled and actually, quite frankly, exempt of the CRA requirements, what I'm going to do. I have the two news, right? The bad news is you're a manufacturer. If you sell your software for money, you're a manufacturer, and you're responsible for making sure first this open source software is good, and if this is healthy enough and follow all of these practices that I just shown, it would be easy to justify, right? The good news is that if you're already kind of doing and releasing software, most likely you're following already SDL and all of these good practices. Continue to follow them, kind of be educated on what's coming next out of the standards, and most likely you're going to be okay. The second question was about the role of the steward. I think this is a broader question. the important point here that the role of steward is kind of not the role that you should be pointed out to, unlike manufacturer, right? We have a clearer definition for a manufacturer, and you can't escape from it. The role of open source steward is defined in CRA as, if you will, optional role. So those foundations or others, they could be stewards or could not be stewards. Okay? If they decided they are stewards, that our expectation is that they're going to help all the open source projects that they're stewarding to be more secure, essentially, and also to demonstrate or express the CRA readiness in their open source projects, though they don't have this obligation, right? So we are going to see, but so far I'm optimistic about at least the biggest foundations are going to be implementing some of the guidelines. As I mentioned, like, we are working with almost all the foundations in order to produce this guidance and these mechanisms to help open source projects, and subsequently to help manufacturers to consume safer and secure open source projects. Any more questions? Who is scared? Not everybody. That's great news and great outcome of the talk. Thank you very much again.